guy doing some crazy cockamamie exercise where he's doing like terrible form, and everyone in the gym is copying him. Everyone. It's like the whole gym is doing the same stupid exercise. And if you actually even ask one person, hey, where'd you get this exercise? Well, I saw someone told me to do it, or I saw some guy doing it, and they just copied it, assuming that this guy knew what he was, because he looked pretty decent, the guy, that he knew what he was doing. I created Species Nutrition with one mission in mind: to provide bodybuilders and serious athletes with no-nonsense supplements that work. I put my name and reputation on every bottle of Species Nutrition products. If you want to be your absolute best, join the evolution.
RX Television, RxMuscle.com. This is Ask Dave, your 30-minute question and answer show with Dave Palumbo. Whatever's on your mind, be it bodybuilding related, non-bodybuilding related, it is all on the table. We're going to go right into the questions. Of course, on the show, the first two questions from the Dave Palumbo Experience app. Pretty bold here. Dave, I'm frustrated. Been helping a young wellness girl from the gym. I've always trusted and believed in extremely high intensity with short duration workouts. Get in, get done, go rest and eat. She tends to lift for hours and does legs 3 times a week. We discussed this last week. Another girl I know does glutes and quads 3 times a week. Both have grown huge mass in the off season. I'm confused. Though this goes against everything we believe, how are they gaining so much muscle from 3 times a week and the one session weekly isn't producing growth? Does this mean if we have a lagging body part, we need to train it 3 times a week?
Good question from the Dave Palumbo Experience app, which is probably I get my best questions from there. If you guys haven't joined already, it's $29 a month. You get Dave Palumbo as your coach in your pocket. All my videos I've ever done, all my writings are all in one place. We put up a workout every week. I answer everyone's questions in an open forum, so everyone sees everyone's questions and everyone's answers. And I do a Q&A video exclusively for the app every single week, in addition to this Ask Dave that we do on this on the regular channel. So you get a lot of value for your money. Check it out at the iTunes store, Android store. Good question. I always ask people, who are you going to ask about how you grow great arms? Ronnie Coleman or the guy who had 12-inch arms and built them to 20 inches? I want to know how that guy did it. Ronnie probably doesn't know how he built 20-inch arms because he had 20-inch arms when he was probably born. So same thing with, a lot of girls, females, they go on a little bit of anabolics, maybe some Anavar, some Winstrol, maybe something harder than that. And they start just training like maniacs, and sometimes they'll grow. It's women don't overtrain as easily as men do. Men seem to have faster metabolisms. But just because someone did something that's not correct and got good results from it doesn't mean that's the right way to do it. And I see this over and over when you go to the gym, and you guys are going to laugh when I say this. And you ever see like this guy doing some crazy cockamamie exercise where he's doing like terrible form, and everyone in the gym is copying him. Everyone. It's like the whole gym is doing the same stupid exercise. And if you actually even ask one person, hey, where'd you get this exercise? Well, I saw someone told me to do it, or I saw some guy doing it, and they just copied it, assuming that this guy knew what he was, because he looked pretty decent, the guy, that he knew what he was doing. But that's the same guy that's running around the gym and doing 6,000 exercises every single time he works out. And he just happens to have good genetics, and he responds to anything. So that's training 3 times a week is for most people a disaster. They don't recover well from that. They overtrain the muscle. It actually gets weaker in 99 times out of 100. Likewise, we don't know what else this person is taking in terms of for recovery purposes and the like. But even still, for most people, like if I were to train legs 3 times a week and go on a massive anabolic cycle, my legs would not get bigger. They would get smaller because I would overtrain them because my metabolism's fast and I just don't recover well. So for me, training once a week works much better, which is what the majority of the people usually experience. So don't copy other people just because they're doing things the wrong way and still getting results. Imagine if she did it the right way, what kind of results she would get. Probably even better. I can't hear you, Sid.
Yeah, I was muted. That's weird. All right. Second question again from the Dave Palumbo Experience app. Post-contest, when do you have your athletes start back training and add size? And what would a return? And again, I guess that would be assuming that they're not going to be competing again in a short period of time. And what would a return to, quote, normal eating look like without turning into the famous old Muscletech ad with the, quote, before Lee Priest pics?
You know, I used to go back to the gym on Monday after a Saturday show. I just like the gym. And you know what? I found that like for 2 weeks after my show, I felt like I could for once go to the gym and just do what I wanted. So I might go into the gym and do some incline bench pressing. Maybe that's it for chest. Maybe some flies after that. Or I might go in and just do some shoulder presses and that's it. You know, maybe like 4 or 5 sets. I would just do whatever struck my fancy. You know, I might go in and just, you know, squat, but not heavy, like maybe like 315, which for me at the time was very light. Might do that for like 10, 15 reps, a couple sets of that, and just leave. So it's fine to go back to the gym because you're going to get a nice rebound, meaning that your body now, after all those weeks and weeks and weeks of starving it and depriving it, now you're giving it excessive amounts of nutrition. You want to put that to good use. The only way that you're going to put that to good use is to break down some muscle tissue. It doesn't have to be a lot. But when you break down muscle, you're going to start building muscle at an accelerated rate. And that's just that compensation effect of your body, because your body says, holy mackerel, tons of nutrition coming in now. Start building muscle because we don't know when we're going to get it again. And, you know, that little, what I call honeymoon period only lasts maybe 4 to 6 weeks. But you can get a nice boost. And that's why I tell people, you know, you don't even need to be on anabolics. I have people start their PCT right after their show, and they'll rebound for 4 weeks because they have stuff in their system still from, you know, when they were competing for 4 weeks. So you're going to get a nice rebound no matter what. And that's what I prefer. As far as diet goes, I usually tell people, try to eat clean, you know, most of your meals, and give yourself a cheat meal every day. So in other words, 1 out of 6 meals, you can eat whatever you want. The other 6 meals, try to eat, when I say clean, I mean, you know, like chicken breasts and rice and stuff like that. Your normal diet that you would normally eat. You can't eat junk all day long, because what will happen is, number one, you're not going to eat. You'll wind up eating only 3 times a day, and you'll be eating 99% fat and carbs, and you're not going to get a nice rebound because you're not putting enough protein in your body. So if you want to benefit from the rebound and you still want to enjoy yourself, give yourself 1 cheat meal a day. But the rest of the meals, make sure you get your nutrition, eat every 2 to 3 hours. Don't miss your feedings or your shakes, because you don't want to lose that rebound effect where you're going to put on some good muscle tissue. I used to gain probably, you know, 5 to 7 to 8 pounds of muscle right after a show. Every single time I competed, it would happen.
Let's go to our Instagram questions, official_RxMuscle. If you're new to this channel, we ask that you subscribe below, hit the notification bell. You're not going to miss any of our show segments or upcoming content. If you like what you're watching, hit the like button. As always, we appreciate your support. Let's go to TMB123. Does a keto diet necessarily have to be low protein, or can a higher protein diet that means the intense training still fit within a keto physiological environment?
I can't believe we're still getting this question, Sid. The medical ketogenic diet is for people with cancer or, you know, epilepsy, which is seizure disorders. And that's for the couch potato. They want your brain in ketosis, meaning that your brain is using fats for fuel, not carbs. If you don't do any exercise and you eat a high protein diet, a lot of that protein can get converted into carbs. And then your brain doesn't go into ketosis. It uses those carbs for fuel. We don't want that. Okay. So that's why people get confused with the medical ketogenic diet versus what I call the Palumbo performance ketogenic diet. My version of the ketogenic diet, which is what I established well before the medical community came out with the medical ketogenic diet, because they didn't even know it worked. But mine is high protein because as athletes, we're breaking down a ton of muscle tissue, which we need to replace. So our bodies are not going to use this protein to convert it into carbs. It's going to use it to rebuild muscle. It's going to use the fat you're eating, okay, as a fuel source, and it'll turn those into ketones, which will be used by the brain for fuel. So the performance ketogenic diet is a high protein, moderate fat, low carb diet. And that's everyone who's a bodybuilder, anyone who's an athlete who uses a ketogenic diet should be using my essential, framework for that. You do not want to do low protein or you will be very, very sorry about it. You'll lose a ton of muscle.
Second question again from our Instagram feed. Ryan's always banned. I take a multivitamin and OMEGALYZE. What else besides FIBERLYZE would you recommend to add to a basic health supplement stack?
I always say the 4 supplements that everyone should take would be, and I'm amended a little bit over the time. OMEGALYZE, which is your essential fats, omega-3 6s. BMineralize, which is vitamins, minerals, trace metals, antioxidants, polyphenolics, all in that one formula. And extra vitamin D3, which I would add about 5,000 IUs to that, which is super cheap to do. I probably at this point, I do it, and I hadn't really recommended. I would add vitamin K2. So there's vitamin K1 and K2. K1 is the responsible for blood clotting. K2 is what's responsible for directing calcium. So vitamin D3 will help you absorb calcium, and then the K2 directs it away from the blood vessels into the bones and into the places it should go. So I would add like D, and you could actually, Life Extension makes a vitamin D3 with K2 in it. So you can actually get both in one formula. And that's pretty much, and then of course, FIBERLYZE, because you need a good fiber supplement. But that essentially is what I call the absolute necessity products, supplements. And then you have what I call the luxury items, which is if you want to use a good whey protein isolate or a carb product, makes it easier to get your protein and carbs in. If you want to add an amino acid formula to drink during the day and take during your workouts, and you can always use like our Amino Evolved. That's also, but that's a luxury item, I always call it. And then you have stuff like, for me and guys that are probably, and women that are probably over the age of 35, I would say a joint formula is probably something that I would say is essential too, because anyone in their 30s, going into their 40s is going to have, joint, soreness. And you really should be using it prior to getting joint soreness, but most people start it when they start getting a little sore in the joints. And that's our ArthroLyze product, which works really well. It's a high potency glucosamine MSM with UC2 collagen. So those are your bare bones. Now, if you have heart issues or heart, ejection fraction issues, you might want to add CoQ10. That's great for heart function. I've been using from Titan Medical Center. I use their injectable glutathione, which is a great antioxidant, good for your immune system. I also use their NAD+, which is supposed to also help with energy production in the cells. Very good also if you have heart issues. Obviously, I had heart surgery, so I'm using their glutathione and their NAD+ in the morning. And then I've been using a little BPC 157 for the healing, healing my sternum and this from the surgeries that I've had. So, but those are all what I call luxury items. The necessities are vitamins, minerals, essential fatty acids, fiber, and then vitamin D3 and K2. Now, ideally, it would make sense if I could put the vitamin D3 and K2 into the BMineralize, because then that would eliminate, having to take another product. Problem is that K2 is a little expensive and it adds a much higher expense to the product. Like I'm talking like dollars. So it's not everyone needs it. So I don't put it into the BMineralize formula. As far as the vitamin D3, I probably could up the amount in there, but some people get weird. They don't want to take so much. So I only put 2,000 units in BMineralize. But once again, if you can adopt this mindset of what I said, that's pretty much, most people can't even get the bare essentials. So all those extras that I mentioned, don't even worry about them. Get the essentials first. Most people have problems just taking the bare essentials. And if you're one of these people that can neurotically do everything like me, that's great. But if you're not and you want the bare minimums, then that's why I made formulas that everything's in one. The BMineralize, OMEGALYZE, et cetera, et cetera.
Let's go to the real Coach Power, is a good friend of the show. I competed in natural bodybuilding for 13 years.
Liar alone. Just kidding.
able to achieve an aesthetic lean physique. I'm in my 40s now, currently on TRT, look fuller, more relatively lean for being on a higher caloric diet. 4 weeks ago, I attempted to lower my calories to achieve a leaner physique. My body was resistant to this. Is it a matter of keeping my calories the same and introducing more cardio output to be able to achieve a leaner physique? Or do I need to add a compound like a Winstrol or a Clen to keep the muscle and burn off the fat?
Steroids really don't burn fat. So, I mean, they can increase metabolic rate, but you're on HRT already. So, taking steroids are not going to make you leaner. Maybe taking clenbuterol will make you leaner. Taking, some T3 with the clenbuterol will make you leaner. You can utilize those if you don't want to be doing more cardio. But, some people's metabolism gets slower as they get older. Some people's metabolism gets faster, actually, because they're continuously growing and adding muscle. And so their bodies are like a metabolic, blast furnace, essentially. I mean, I can't get fat. I mean, it's impossible. As long as I'm training, even when I wasn't training, when I was, going through my recovery of my shoulder replacements for 12 weeks and I wasn't working out, I wasn't gaining any body fat, but I wasn't also pushing a lot of food. When I'm training like now, I probably gained, after my aorta surgery, I was down to 182, believe it or not, the lowest I had been since high school. And I am back up to like 202. So I gained 20 pounds in the last 4 months. Now, I was up to 2 something before I went in for the surgery. So I kind of gained back what I lost. But I had also been a little lower than that. So I had put on about 10 pounds prior to the surgery because I knew I needed a little buffer. And because I do have a fast metabolism, you have to anticipate these things. I always said to myself, holy mackerel, I have no body fat. If I ever got and I don't welcome that into my wheelhouse, but I did have thyroid cancer. And you think about, I have friends who have cancer and are going through, chemotherapy, and they're losing tons of weight. I'm like, I wouldn't have any weight to lose. Thank God, that my thyroid cancer really was, was pretty simple to deal with, but I didn't have to do any like chemotherapy or anything like that. But, sometimes if you're going to have a surgery, it's good to build up a little bit of a reserve. A lot of times these orthopedic surgeons with older people will give them like a shot of DECA for a couple of weeks prior to surgery, a couple of weeks in a row, like serial weeks, like 2-3 weeks, just to build up the bone density a little bit so that when they go in there and do the hip replacement, they have a little bit more density there and they have a little bit more tissue on their body, so that knowing that while they're in the recovery process, they're going to have an easier time recovering. And that's what those drugs were really developed for. They weren't developed for bodybuilders. They were developed to help people with wasting diseases or people who didn't have enough muscle mass on their bodies. And, when they're used correctly, they achieve what they're supposed to. So I kind of did that with myself prior to, that surgery and prior to my ankle surgery as well. So, you have to be smart. You have to think and anticipate what's going to happen and how your body's going to respond. But as you get older, definitely people notice their metabolic rate going down. I use a lot of, when I work with a lot of women who are a little overweight in their 40s going to their 50s, clenbuterol and T3 work really well with them. And there's no side effects in terms of masculinization, which is great.
Paulie 3219, we've gotten this question in the past. The question, you just kind of blankly asked it. So I guess if you want to apply it to now and then, during the course of your competition career, if you had to only pick one legal supplement to take, what would it be and why?
That's tough because, one, there's no real, because you can't just say I'm going to take vitamin C, you know what I mean? So I'm assuming he means like a performance supplement like creatine or something like that. I think that creatine has pretty much stood the test of time in the sense that we know it volumizes the muscle, which helps the muscle, repair itself and be in a more anabolic state. We know it increases ATP in the muscle cell, prevents ATP from being depleted as quickly. So it definitely increases endurance. It's probably the most tried and true supplement out there in the sense that it's reproducible. It's been around since the early 90s and people are still using it to this day. Matter of fact, the prices of creatine finally came down a little bit. We had stopped making our BLOODWORK, and we use a creatine monohydrate that has a very, very fine micronization because the more micronized it is, the more easily it mixes and goes and solubilizes. A lot of people use micronized creatine, but there's different grades of it. We use the highest grade, which is unfortunately the most expensive, but it works the best. But we had stopped making creatine because it was so expensive. So now the price has come down. We'll probably start making BLOODWORK again. And a lot of people like the product because it did mix well, and you do get good results. I mean, and you don't have to. Back in the day, Bill Phillips was saying you had a load on 20 grams a day, and everyone got diarrhea from that. And you don't do that. We don't do that anymore. You do 5 grams a day, you know, and after about 2 weeks on it, you're pretty much loaded on it, and you'll see reproducible results. So I'd have to say that creatine is probably the most is the one supplement that I would say actually does something that you can legally buy. I'm not talking about the gray market stuff. I'm not talking about peptides you can kind of legally buy. I'm talking about real stuff that you can go into like a GNC or a vitamin shop and actually pick up legally. I would say creatine is probably the best bang for your buck.
Interesting one here from Mark Costanzo. Can you grow one section of your lat without the other? More specifically, can you grow the top half that shows in front poses but lack development around back near your spine? Or does a muscle have to grow all as one?
Well, I mean, you kind of answered your own question. If you're doing partial movements, you're going to get partial development, right? I mean, that's why we always say if you want full, complete development of a muscle, you have to train it through its entire range of motion, meaning you want full extension, you know, full retraction. If you're doing anything for back, like rows, I see guys in the gym, they're doing this. You know, they're moving the weight this much. They're going to get some lat development, but it's going to be very limited in you know what they're developing because they're not utilizing the whole range of motion. That means they're missing parts of the muscle. So yeah, you can absolutely not train a muscle in its completion. Look at legs. You see people who squat, they do like partials. They have like they have a little bit of definition in their quads, but they don't have that big sweepy look to their quads on the outside with the glute development because they don't go all the way down. So yeah, it's absolutely possible to partially develop a muscle.
We had a question about the I'm going to save this one to the end. Let's save this one till later on. I know you discussed it on Heavy Muscle Radio with Kai Green, the recent guest posing. And I know you brought up to Chris, like, well, wouldn't you love to see him at the Masters Olympia? And Chris's retort was, and forget Masters Olympia, you probably want to see him at the Olympia, you know, given how he looked. But, you know, the Masters Olympia is around the corner. I don't have the full lineup in front of me. I know there are a lot of names that came out from the woodwork, but lineup aside, what would be one name that you would love to see, you know, come back in that capacity to compete at the Masters Olympia?
That realistically can? Yeah, I have to add that obviously because I could like say I'd like to see Arnold on stage, but Arnold right. Realistically is 75 years old. You know, I think Phil Heath. I'd like to see Phil come back. I think that Phil still has it. You know, he's still big and freaky looking. He trains every day. He definitely is not downsized. I'd love to see Phil back on the stage, just like I'd like to see Kai, because I think the both of them are still relevant. I think they're still relevant. They still have relevant physiques. I don't want to see someone who's, you know, like I love Dexter, but Dexter's like, you know, he's retired. You know, for him to come back, he'd have to try to put back all the muscle he took off. That's not realistic. But Phil and Kai are both big, so I think those two guys are people that are guys that people would love to see on stage.
DeBerg 62. So his question is about, you know, guys from back in the day had better muscle separation. How come it's not there now? I'll pivot the question as far as, you know, how does somebody develop muscle separation? How does somebody develop that deep, you know, separation that I guess he's referring to the era of the 90s? But what would your advice be for someone looking to develop real visible muscle separation?
Some muscle separation is genetic. Kai Green, for instance, can lock his leg down in the middle of his off season to 320 pounds, and he's got separated quadricep muscle with like lines through them. He doesn't have to do anything. He doesn't have to even be lean to see those. That's just in his genetic makeup, the way his muscle is. So that's one thing. But I remember I was dieting, you know, for one of my first, it wasn't my first show. It was like one of my first like shows that I really did well. I think it was in '94. And I remember my friend Doug saying, look, you got to get leaner. You got to lean. And I was lean. You know, I had striated glutes. He's like, you can get leaner. And I finally saw what he meant, because I lost probably another 3 or 4 pounds over the next 2 weeks prior to the show. And my pecs had all these fibery lines going down the middle of them when I hit like a most muscular shot. And I understood what he was saying, because now I had detail and separation that was not there before. And it really just amounted to me suffering more, not eating as much, having to restrict my food a little bit more, do a little more cardio, and just suffer that weight off. Because muscle separation that you can get through dieting comes from sacrifice. I mean, Livroni talked about it when I interviewed him. He said he would eat fish and vegetables for every meal. No one does that nowadays. No one wants to suffer like that. And that was Livroni, who was, a genetic freak. But he knew if he wanted to get those grainy, fibery looks, to his delts and arms and chest and abs, you have to basically suffer that weight off. You have to get rid of that intramuscular fat a little bit, so that you can see all those little grooves and little crevices, because that's what makes you look ridiculous on stage. And that's the stuff you can't necessarily see in pictures, but when you're there in person, the judges are super impressed by that. And that's suffering. So I think that a lot of it is a suffering aspect, that people don't want to get that lean anymore because they think they're going to lose fullness, or they're not going to be big enough on stage. And so to me, that's probably what happened. But there are guys that, like I said, that are just genetically separated no matter what. They just have to get kind of lean, and you see stuff in their body that you can't see in other people's bodies. And that's genetic gifts.
Take a couple of more questions. I wanted to get
one
this
more.
one in.
We got to do after hours.
Right. Okay. All right. Let me get this one in.
Okay.
Richard White, is there any real scientific studies for adding extra muscle cells with weight training, or is it all just observations, best practice, cell maximization, not real added cells to our genetic muscle structure?
You can do that. That's called hyperplasia. And they've shown that growth hormone via the release of IGF-1 from the liver does take, we used to call them satellite cells, or the gunk that surrounded the real muscle fibers. Now we call them stem cells, same cells. We can get stem cells to turn into real muscle tissue, muscle cells, when they're stimulated by IGF-1, whether it's done naturally in your body or you're doing it artificially by taking shots of growth hormone or IGF-1 themselves. And yes, you're going to produce new muscle tissue. So you're going to now take these stem cells, you're going to turn them into muscle cells, but they're really small. You still have to get them bigger through weight training and or anabolic steroids can enlarge those cells. So that's why I believe that guys in this era are much bigger than guys were years ago, because we have the availability of GH and IGF-1. These are things that really didn't hit the world till the late 90s. And really didn't get popular until 2000. So it's only been about 20 years, really 25 years that GH and IGF-1 has been around enough to actually induce this hyperplasia effect in bodybuilders and for us to see the results of it. So that's why when you say, hey, why did the guys in the 90s, the late 90s, why were they so much bigger than the guys in the 80s? And why were the guys in 2000 so much bigger than the guys in the 90s? Because of, the changing of people's genetics through inducing stem cells to turning into mature muscle cells. Now, obviously, you still have to train and enlarge those, but the genetic potential to get bigger was there when it wasn't there in the 80s.
That's going to do for this episode of Ask Dave. If you haven't already done so, subscribe below, hit the notification bell. If you like what you're watching, hit the like button, comment below. And as always, we appreciate your support. For Dave Palumbo, I'm Sadiq Faruqi. We'll see you next time.